I'm Kelly Mitchell, and this is Women on Wine TV. We're celebrating wine and living your very best life. Joining me is my partner in wine, Debra Trapin. Welcome to the show, Debra.
Hi there. How are you?
I'm fabulous. How are you?
I'm excellent. Can you hear me?
I can hear you fabulously. Can you hear me?
I can. Hooray!
You never know when things are going to go sideways, right? And it's not a new episode. It's certainly technology, the show, the variables, how many things we have to put together, yada, 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 yada. So we are, before I get into all of that fun stuff, we're going to begin with a quote. I always love being in the company of women. It's all about great conversation and fabulous wine, and that's Naomi Watts. We're super excited about today's episode because we have a special guest. She's a winemaker. We love wine. We love winemakers. We also love wineries. But this is Kari Auringer. She's a winemaker of Cornerstone Cellars, and she is making amazing wine. Amazing wine is an understatement, but she does all of their Napa production for wine. So we're going to get a little bit more into that as soon as we get into what's in our glass. What is in your glass today, Debra?
Well, of course, in honor of Cornerstone's winemaker being in the house, I am drinking Cornerstone. This is the 2012 Black Label Cabernet Franc. And let me just tell you, it has some of our favorite notes. Tobacco, a little bit of sweet berry, some oaky spice in there. I kind of say when I drink it, it kind of makes me go zing, because it's kind of sassy. It's great to drink right now. Like, you could absolutely buy it and open it and consume it, or you could lay it down for a year or two. It doesn't need to be aged, but it could be, and I think that's kind of the fun thing. Cornerstone, for those of you who are socially active on Twitter, they are at Cornerstone Napa. So if you've tried the Cab Franc before, please give them and us a shout out using at Cornerstone Napa and the Pound Women on Wine hashtag today. What's in your glass?
What's in my glass today is this fabulous, look at the color on that. Is that just too beautiful? This sexy 2014 Syrah Rosé. It's a Napa Valley. Check this out. And it looks like there's fun in the bottle, and I'll tell you what, absolute fun. We've got amazing red berry notes. It's got a hint of vanilla and little peppery spices that come out on the nose. It's just one of those, what do we call them? Porch pounders. You could drink it with anything, anywhere. But today I'm pairing mine with this basil chicken coconut curry sauce because it can stand up to the spice and it also complements the coconut. So it's fabulous. It's just fabulous. And a thank you to Cornerstone for the wine today because we're absolutely loving it. Now we have a word for the show, and our word for the show is women. Every time you hear that word, then you take a sip out of what's in your glass, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. While you sip, I'm going to say, I forgot to add my pairing. This is perfect with anything lamb. Lamb chops, lamb burgers, lamb. That tobacco with the little sweet berries would be so divine with that. So if you've got lamb on your table, you should have Cab Franc from Cornerstone in your glass.
Now, we had some fun. We had a lot of fun with the interview, and we're actually recording this after the fact. As with technology, there are often little surprises, glitches, and more surprises. So we were right in the midst of a question when we saw that the lab we were doing wasn't recording. So I wanted to do this little intro and start it off right so we can get right into the interview with Kari Auringer. So Deb, anything I've missed?
Oh, I think that's great. I think everyone just put on your seatbelts. You're in for a sassy interview with an amazing woman in wine who is about to share some really great truths and resources and ways to get involved as well. So cheers.
Cheers. And one side note, we did, as soon as I say that, I remember one thing, and that is that there are only, at 10% of women are winemakers today. So we're toasting the women winemakers, every single one of them, and hope that more of you join that crowd.
Oh, I
Cheers.
love it. Something.
So your question was what I think is the most challenging part, and it is Mother Nature for sure, because nothing's going to happen unless you have really good grapes coming out of the vineyard. And one of the things that we specialize in at Cornerstone is really making sure that the wines are true to the vineyard, the vintage, and the varietal. We're not actually trying to make wine something that it wasn't intended to be. And the hardest part for me is being out in the vineyard. It's my favorite part. Most likely, if I'm not in the winery, that's where I am. I'm out kicking the dirt. But Mother Nature, even in Napa, when, you know, people around the world laugh and say, Napa, the weather's perfect all the time. But, you know, you get rain during harvest, or now we've dealt with now 4 years of drought, and the vines blossomed very early in the year, and the harvest started very early. And there was always that struggle. And then once you can actually say, tomorrow, I'm picking tomorrow, and then you get those grapes into the winery and they are what you were expecting, and it's exactly what you thought would happen. But that's the hard part. Like, all that time up until harvest is actually the challenging part for me, and where the excitement is.
Wow. Yeah, I can't imagine. I mean, it's that you have no idea what the lack of rain is going to do to the grape. I mean, there's nothing you can do. It's not like you can go out there and like dump water on it, right? So
no, even with irrigation, and you know, there are a lot of vineyards in Napa that are irrigated, and so you think that, well, we'll just irrigate them, but there's nothing that replaces a cold winter with soaking rain. You just can't replicate that.
So is that something that you learned from being in school, or do you have a mentor? Like, do you have somebody that's on speed dial where you're like, I'm just so curious about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's interesting. In a lot of industries, your peers won't tell you much. They don't want to share their secrets. They don't want to tell you what's going on. They're not going to tell you how they made it to the top. But the wine industry in general, and women in particular, are incredibly open and helpful and generous and kind. And I'm moved actually by how great it is to be able to work. I work in a winery facility where other consulting winemakers work as well. And you can walk in with a glass of something and go, man, this just isn't right. And they'll happily smell it, sniff it, taste it, and go, you know, if I were you, this is what I would do. And who else does that? Who else, you know, who else would tell their whatever competition how to make their wine even better? And it's one of the amazing things, and it's what I love about this industry. There's just so many generous and amazingly knowledgeable and experienced people. I would say Mia Klein is one of those people, and Allison Doran Green is another one. And those two women they have more knowledge and more experience, and they're so willing to give that up and share that. And you know, I think it is, if one wins, we all win, you know, so we really all kind of are in it together. And it's so refreshing, because it wasn't like that in the other industries that I've worked in.
That's a beautiful thing. And both women. I love that.
Yeah.
Women, women, women. Somebody needs to take a sip.
I had a few sips. You're going to be peeling me off the floor soon.
It's Rosé.
Exactly, Rosé. I think I might be a little bit in trouble with the Cab Franc, but that's okay.
That is true.
You're okay with a Rosé.
So, Kari, you know, chemistry is so important when you're talking about tasting wine. And I think a lot of people kind of get caught up in what the experts say. And being that a bottle of wine is a living, breathing, you know, microorganism, I guess I would say, for want of a better word, how important is chemistry in the winemaking process?
Well, it's critical, actually, and it is one of the things I actually went back to school for, is to get my chemistry really nailed down. For me, the chemistry is actually, it's, if you're building a house, you need a solid foundation, and for me, chemistry is the foundation. Once you have that solid foundation, you could create anything you want. And so you have the room and the freedom to play and express yourself with the vineyard and the fruit if your chemistry is solid and you know what that is. So I think it's both. It's both science and art. And I think you have to get the science laid down first, and then you just can create, and it's so much fun. It gives you this playground to play in, really.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Deborah.
I love that. So one of the things that Kelly and I kind of giggle about with wine is, like we were saying, oh, tobacco, berries, these types of things. And how, there are folks out there who think little menehune are dropping in berries or tobacco leaves or whatever.
Yep.
Is there some place that you go, whether it's a mentor or a resource that tells you, grapes from this particular area are going to have more of that tobacco or vanilla, or do you just kind of just let it go and, kind of go with the flow with where you actually have purchased in the past? In other words, do you try to seek out an area that has a specific flavor profile in the past wines?
Yes. So your last question, that's definitely yes. It's about, go back to where I said you have to get 6 bottles of wine and open them at home. And I suggest getting 6 Malbec, or getting 6 Cab Franc, or getting 6 Rosé made from a particular grape. And then you can actually start to see what is similar about them, and then what is different about them. And the similarities should be more about the grape itself, and the differences should be about the region it's grown, the winemaking style, barrels that were used. So it's really helpful to try a bunch of them all at once. So I highly encourage drinking. I think it's important that we taste as often as we can. That is actually where it came from. And if you talk to people, excuse me, a little frog. If you talk to people, they know that through their own experience that in the southern part of Napa, it's cooler and you're going to get more red fruit. And if you're up in the warmer parts of the valley, Calistoga, St. Helena, where it's warmer, you're going to get more of the earth and the spice and some other complexities. So you can figure out kind of where you want your grapes to come from based on the climate. And I think that there are some people that will plant grapes where they don't belong. Pinot Noir belongs in a cooler climate. Cabernet, on the other hand, does well in a warmer climate. So it pays to actually plant those things where they belong. And not everybody does that. But again, at Cornerstone, we're not trying to make a wine something that it shouldn't be, something that it isn't. So it does depend on where they come from.
I love that. So real quick, is there a place that you know of that categorizes all of that? Or do you just learn that as you go? Like as a winemaker, you just know what region produces what flavors. That's the part that confuses me as kind of the drinker, not the maker.
Yeah. I actually started to learn that before I started making wine. And I learned that I took a lot of classes. I went through the Wine and Spirits Education Trust and things like that. And you're doing, sitting down and doing flights of wines. The Culinary Institute in Napa also offers those kind of classes. And so I started, even before I started making wine, trying to figure out why this Pinot Noir tastes like this, and then why this Pinot Noir doesn't taste the same, while there's similarities. So it's really, you don't even have to be a winemaker to really kind of dig into that. The Cab Franc, try it from a couple of different regions and you'll see what the impact that it has on Cab Franc. For me, Cab Franc, you need to have it in a warm enough place where it gets ripe. If you get a Cab Franc and it has sort of a green bell pepper asparagus, it may have been that it was planted in a cooler climate and it didn't get quite as ripe as it should have.
Oh, that's interesting.
That's very interesting, because I've had a couple of wines that the pungency of the green pepper was a turnoff.
Mm-hmm.
If
I think
it is for me
on the show where you were like, oh, I can't drink this. Do you remember that, Kelly? And it was.
Oh yeah, I had to put the glass down and the bottle down, and I was hoping it was something that I could share with the audience. Kari, I'm curious. From the standpoint of barrel tasting, I've been a part of a couple of barrel tastings now, and to me it's super exciting. But I guess where I'm mystified a little bit is, how can a barrel tasting show you which wines have the most promise? Like, can you predict that based on a barrel tasting?
You can't 100% predict that, but you can, because you taste over a period of time, you actually can see how a wine's developing. Right now, the wines are babies, the 2015s, and some of them are just finishing their malolactic fermentation, their secondary fermentation. And so we're just now starting to taste them, but even though they're not going to be bottled for 2 years and we'll spend another year in the bottle, you can start to taste the components that are already there. They have to already be there. You know, you could go, wow, this doesn't really have much fruit, or this one's tasting a little whatever that is. So yeah, you really can get an idea. But what you also know is in the next 2 years, we're going to do a lot of blending. We're going to pick specific barrels, and we're going to be tasting quite often. And I taste all the wines at least once a month, and right now almost every week to see how they're coming along. So that's actually kind of the fun part as well, just to see them progressing. And this year, because of our Rhone program, we've got new grapes from a new vineyard. So it's a vineyard I'm not familiar with at all. And so that's been super fun.
That's exciting. Debra, question.
Yeah. It just sounds like you have just the worst job in the whole world. Like, oh gosh, last week I had to just taste every single day.
I did. It's it's difficult at 7:30 in the morning. It's a little difficult.
Pretend you're in Paris, right? Like you just pretend like I'm in the Rhone Valley today. I'm not I'm actually in Napa. Turn your clock ahead.
I love it.
So the interesting thing that we get a lot of questions about on the show is pairings, and so I thought we've got a lot of big meals that happen in America, not just during the holidays, but throughout the year. So what is your favorite pairing for, say, a Cab Franc? If somebody's trying to figure out what do they want to eat with this, what would you say this is my go-to?
Gosh, there are some classic pairings. You could say, there's some classic pairings and there are some myths about pairings. One of the myths I would like to completely put out in the light is not all cheese goes with all wine. Yes. And I think you have to be careful about pairing particular cheeses with particular wines. But when it comes to a classic pairing, Pinot Noir and mushrooms, that earthy, nice mushroomy thing, that's a classic pairing. I think it's a challenge when you get to a meal like Thanksgiving. We've got Thanksgiving coming up, and people are like, wow, what do I get? What should I get with a meal that's got so many complex flavors and textures? And I go with rosé because it's so versatile. It's not old school. The rosé we're making now is actually very complex, and it's a really interesting wine, and it's got lots of layers, and it's got bright acidity, but it's got nice fruit, and it goes with a lot of the items that are going to end up on your Thanksgiving table. The other thing that I think works really well is Pinot Noir. But, then like you said earlier in the show, you asked me what my go-to wine was, and it's Pinot Noir. So I might be slightly biased, but there is certainly lots of research, and people have, built their whole careers on pairing wine and food together. But those are some classics that work really well. Some people would say that chocolate and Cabernet is a classic pairing. For me personally, it's not my favorite, but there are people who love Cabernet.
That's interesting because it doesn't work for me either, really. Honestly, a lot of people do chocolate with wine, and I have yet to find a varietal where I was like, oh yeah, this goes so well. And it's probably just my personal chemistry, but I'm so glad to know that I'm not alone. I like them separately. I totally love and appreciate them separately.
Me too. Well, it needs to be a darker chocolate too, and then it's the sugar that's the problem. Like I would never pair Cabernet and M&Ms. But
me either.
Well, I might try it. But I'm probably not gonna like it. But like an 80% Valrhona chocolate probably is gonna be pretty good. It's still nothing I'm going after, but there are people that that's their thing.
Kari, I'm curious, for the people that are out there watching this right now, and in particular women, if they had a desire or a thought, the women, Debra, women.
Hey, how close is that?
You have the Cab Franc, baby. Go for it. No, just kidding. What kind of advice would you have to them? And I know you kind of started on this adventure late in life, and that I believe is part of your magic because you understood where your passion was and you went for it. You didn't hold back. You went for it. So what kind of advice do you have for women trying to get into the arena now, and in particular into the winemaking arena?
Well, it's, it's never been easier than it is right now, thanks to the people who really have blazed the trail before me. But there's so many programs available too for people who wanted to go to school and do that. I do recommend going to school. There's the University of Davis, obviously has a great enology program. Fresno, Sonoma State. I took all the classes that the Napa College had to offer, and that was great background as well as Davis. But I recommend first, before you invest in the school, or while you're going to school and before you've really figured out your major, is go work a harvest. Go work a harvest. And honestly, I would recommend doing one here and then go abroad and do one, because then you can get two done in a year. But go to New Zealand, go to Australia. If you speak some Spanish, it's helpful. Go down to Argentina and Chile. And work in the cellar and get cold and wet and dirty day after day and see if you like it. Because, it isn't all amazing tasting wine and glamorous all day. It's, there's a lot of, you have to love cleaning stuff. Because sanitation's important. But you get to do all of that, and you'll get to haul hoses, and you'll get to work with really good winemakers, and you get to taste a lot of wine, and you get to be in the vineyard, and you'll get to see the whole part of it. And you may actually find that really where your love is out in the vineyard and not so much in the winery. So I would recommend working a harvest or two, and you'll find people that will be happy to mentor you. And, you have to sort of be able to work at a really low wage, but they do pay. There's those free internships. They don't do that really. Everyone will get compensated for working, but it is such a great experience. And then you get you get an experience of all the grapes and all the wines, and before you can really decide what you want to do. And then find a mentor or two, and there are many, and they're happy to help. And I think that now it's probably never been better if you really wanted to get into this industry.
Thank you. Debra.
I think my last question is just kind of taking that to the next step, which is, so if I want to find a mentor, how do I do that? Do I just pick up the phone and call the winery, or what's the easiest way for me to because that's scary, right? I'm saying, I don't know this, but I want to. I want to know what I don't know. So what would you say? Where would I go?
I would say for me, I just networked like a fiend. I called people, and I emailed people, and I dropped in on people. Not that I recommend that highly, but I actually got my first real opportunity to make wine by a friend telling me that this was happening over here, and I made one more call, and they went, oh yeah, you know what? I know someone who's looking for and I went, that's me. And so you just have to be willing to talk to people. And like I said, people are super nice. No one's going to hang up the phone on you. They might not be very helpful, some of them, if they're, too busy, or you just called them at the wrong time. But I would say find a few wines that you like, figure out who made them, and call them and say, I love your wine. I'm interested in the industry. Can you help me?
I love that. I think if one word encapsulated that, it's be tenacious. You sound like you need the word tenacious on a t-shirt, because I think that the fun part about your story is that, I feel like I'm going to get a little bit pumped. It might be the Cab Franc, I'm not sure. But, I work with a lot of women in business who are doing things that don't fill their soul tank. And they're doing it for, getting kids through school or paying a mortgage. And they wake up one day and they're like, oh my God, it's too late. And I'm like, no, it's not too late. It's never too late.
Yeah, never.
So I appreciate you sharing your story, because it's very, very inspiring. And I think it's such a cool part about being a woman who loves to empower and elevate other women, that you have such an amazing story to share. And I'm so glad that we get to be part of amplifying that. So thank you for being here.
Absolutely. I have one final question. And that is very as specific as possible. What makes Cornerstone different? Because I think people look at, there's so many, wineries across the nation now, and popping up in areas we never thought they'd be. What makes Cornerstone exceptional and standing out above the rest?
That's a great question. And I have to say, earlier in my career, I had the opportunity to work with Cornerstone through 2006 and to 2009. So I've had some experience with Cornerstone. And then later on, I actually had the opportunity to now come back and work for Cornerstone. And the reason I didn't hesitate for a moment is because I knew when I had worked with them previously, they were working with some of the best vineyards in the valley, which a lot of people are. So that's not completely amazing, but we are working with great vineyards. But Cornerstone, the brand was built on being true to the vineyard, the vintage, and the varietal. And that is the game that I'm playing. That is exactly what I'm doing. I want to take the vineyard and have it show its best self. And I want to have the varietal. I want you to be able to put your nose in that glass and go, I know this is Cab Franc. This isn't trying to be some other wine that it's not supposed to be. It's Cab Franc. And then you can actually say, and I believe it might have even been from this vintage. It's from a cold vintage or a warm vintage or whatever, but we don't try and manipulate the wines in the cellar, which you can do, and some people do. But what I love about Cornerstone is they're really true to what the wine is supposed to be and lets the wine speak for itself. And that's actually what drew me back to Cornerstone and has me so happy working here. And the people are amazing. You know, it's a really good.
Absolutely so refreshing.
Yeah.
Okay, Debra, you're going to walk us out. We're out of time, so we need a wrap.
Are we doing a wrap? Is it a wrap? Wrap. Yes. We're going to stick around for a little bit and see if there's any questions that we need to visit. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this evening on Women on Wine TV. And special thanks to Kari from Cornerstone Cellars for not only the great wine education, but for the incredibly inspiring story. Be sure to check out the blog post and all of the chats up to the side. You're going to see some great links to get connected with this amazing winery and their awesome deal they're offering the Women on Wine community. So stock up, at least for sure, on the Cab Franc and the delicious rosé that Kelly has in her glass. And the Pinot from Morgan. And make sure to hashtag Pound Women on Wine when you are drinking it so that we can be part of the conversation with you. If there's a varietal that we didn't talk about today on Cornerstone, tell us about that and we'll be sure to sip it soon. Take good care, and for now, cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.